I never thought I'd see him again. Emily Carter whispered to herself as she pushed open the door to her favorite corner cafe, the late morning sun spilling through the cracked blinds and hitting the curve of her belly, 6 months along. The air smelled faintly of espresso and cinnamon, a normal day in Manhattan, calm and ordinary, but that calm shattered when she spotted him at the corner table. Derek Sullivan. The mafia boss who had walked out of her life, cold and indifferent, months ago because of something she couldn't control. His dark eyes, usually sharp with authority, now widened slightly as they locked on hers, his expression frozen for just a moment before masking into practiced composure. Emily's heart slammed against her ribs, a mixture of fear, anger, and something she refused to name. She gripped her purse tighter, the leather pressing against her fingertips as if to anchor her to reality. Derek's hand paused mid-motion, a silver teaspoon hovering above his untouched cup of black coffee, his gaze not leaving the curve of her belly. She tried to look away, pretending to adjust the scarf around her shoulders, but his presence felt magnetic, impossible to ignore. The world outside the cafe melted into a soft blur, all she could see was him, and all he could see was the undeniable proof that she had moved on without him, proof that she carried life where once there was only absence. Emily's mind raced back to that afternoon in Derek's office, the last time she had seen him, the words still cutting deep, I can't wait for something that isn't coming. Infertility. That single word had been an avalanche, burying her under shame and heartbreak, forcing her to walk away from the man she had loved with every ounce of her being. And now, 6 months later, the universe had delivered a twist neither of them could have predicted. Derek's eyes, usually unreadable, betrayed a flicker of emotion, a crack in the armor he wore so well. His jaw tightened, fingers tapping an invisible rhythm on the table, and the cafe seemed to hold its breath along with Emily. She took a shallow breath, feeling the gentle movement of her baby with her hand, a small reassurance. Against the storm brewing in the room. Derek rose, the chair scraping softly against the floor, a silent warning and an unspoken question at once. He stepped closer, each footfall deliberate, measured, the aura of power and authority he carried filling the space around him, yet his eyes remained locked on her, searching, calculating, trying to reconcile the past with the present. Emily's pulse raced. She could feel the weight of the moment pressing down like the humid July air outside. She wanted to speak, to say something that might protect her from the tidal wave of memory and desire, but her voice caught, lodged somewhere between fear and awe. Derek stopped just a few feet away, close enough that she could see the slight tremor in his normally steady hands, close enough that she could feel the intensity radiating off him. His lips parted, a single word, low and measured, but heavy with meaning, Emily. And in that instant, time seemed to suspend, the hum of the cafe, the clatter of cups and saucers, even the soft murmur of other patrons fading into the background. He wasn't just looking at her. He was seeing every choice, every heartbreak, every moment they had lost, and now he was seeing what he had missed. Emily swallowed hard, gripping the edge of the counter for balance, her breath shallow, her thoughts spinning. The city outside continued unaware, cars honking, pedestrians walking, but in that small cafe, it was just the two of them, bound by the invisible thread of the past and the startling reality of the life growing inside her. She met his gaze fully, daring to search for the man she remembered, for the one who had left, for the one who now could not look away. Derek's hand twitched, a subtle, involuntary movement, before he finally exhaled slowly, a sound almost lost beneath the soft cafe chatter, but for Emily, it was the loudest thing she had ever heard. The unspoken question hung between them, heavy and palpable, what now? And for the first time since that cruel afternoon 6 months ago, Emily felt the spark of possibility, fragile but undeniable, threading through her chest as she realized the story was far from over. Emily took a hesitant step toward the counter, her hands trembling slightly as she balanced her coffee cup, the heat seeping into her palms, a small comfort against the surge of adrenaline coursing through her. Derek remained still, a statue of composed authority, his eyes never leaving hers, scanning every subtle movement, every shift in posture, as if cataloging the woman she had become in his absence. The soft murmur of the cafe faded into a distant hum, replaced by the steady thrum of Emily's heartbeat pounding in her ears. She took another careful step, feeling the curve of her belly press against the fabric of her coat, a constant reminder of the life she carried and the changes that had occurred since the last time he had seen her. Derek tilted his head slightly, a gesture almost imperceptible, but enough for Emily to feel the weight of his attention, like a spotlight focused sharply on her. Her breath hitched, shallow and quick, and she could feel the tension in her shoulders tightening, muscles coiling in anticipation, the same anticipation she had felt on the day he had walked out, leaving silence in his wake. She reached for the napkin holder on the counter, fingers brushing against cold metal, grounding herself in the present, reminding herself that despite the past, she was still standing, still moving forward. Derek stepped closer, measured, deliberate, each movement precise and controlled, a silent force that commanded the space between them without a word, yet spoke volumes in the way his eyes followed her every gesture. Emily met his gaze fully, daring to hold it, searching for some hint of the man she remembered, the one behind the reputation and the aura of power. The cafe seemed smaller now, the distance between them charged with unspoken history, 1,000 moments suspended in a single heartbeat. Derek's hand twitched almost imperceptibly, a micro-expression of vulnerability buried beneath the veneer of dominance, and Emily noticed a flicker of something unspoken passing through his eyes, a subtle acknowledgement of the life that had continued without him. She took a slow breath, letting the warmth of the coffee cup seep into her hands, a calming rhythm against the storm of her emotions, and allowed herself a fleeting sense of courage, daring to speak. "You have not changed," she murmured, voice soft but steady, carrying both the weight of accusation and the strength of survival. Derek's lips pressed into a thin line, eyes narrowing just slightly, the tension in the room stretching taut like a drawn string, and he finally spoke, low and deliberate, "Neither have you." The words were simple, yet layered with history, with the recognition of everything that had been lost and everything that had been gained. Emily felt a shiver run down her spine, part fear, part exhilaration, as the realization settled in that the encounter was not just chance, but an inevitable convergence of paths that had once diverged. Outside, the sun shifted, casting a slant of light across the floor, illuminating the curve of her belly, and Derek's gaze flicked involuntarily, acknowledging the undeniable proof of time and life moving forward. Emily's pulse raced, fingers tightening around the cup, her mind a whirl of memories, hopes, and unspoken questions, and for a fleeting moment, the world narrowed to the space between them, a delicate balance of power, vulnerability, and the fragile thread of connection that neither had expected to find again. Emily felt a tightening in her chest as Derek remained close, his presence a weight she could not escape, yet one she strangely did not want to. The ambient sounds of the cafe, the clatter of cups, the low hum of conversation, the hiss of the espresso machine, faded into background static, leaving only the measured rhythm of her own heartbeat and the subtle cadence of his breathing. She took a careful sip of her coffee, the warmth spreading through her hands and grounding her, while her eyes never left his, tracing the familiar angles of his face, the dark sweep of hair, the intensity of those ice-blue eyes that had haunted her memories. Derek shifted slightly, the movement minimal, deliberate, yet loaded with unspoken intent, and Emily could feel the tension in the space between them stretched taut, a silent conversation carried entirely in posture and gaze. Her mind replayed fragments of the months that had passed, early mornings, late nights, quiet dinners, moments of solitude filled with thought of what might have been and what had been lost. She remembered the first ultrasound, the surprise, the joy, the sense of life continuing despite all the heartbreak. She remembered arranging her small apartment, preparing for the new arrival, feeling both apprehensive and exhilarated at the thought of being alone, yet whole in ways she had never imagined. Derek's eyes flickered down once, briefly, toward the gentle curve of her belly, and she sensed the storm of emotion behind his composed exterior, the shock, the hesitation, the undeniable pull of recognition. Her fingers tightened around the rim of the cup, nails pressing into the porcelain, and she forced herself to inhale slowly, counting to 3, grounding herself in the present, in the ordinary, in the act of standing here, facing him. Derek finally spoke, voice low and even, carefully measured. "You have grown," he said, and the simple acknowledgement carried the weight of months of absence, of regrets unspoken, of moments missed. Emily swallowed, the movement catching in her throat, and let a small, tentative smile tug at the corners of her lips, a fragile bridge across the gulf of their history. Derek's jaw flexed, eyes narrowing slightly, and he took another small step, close enough that she could feel the subtle shift in air, the gravity of his presence, but still respecting the invisible line she had drawn. She met his gaze fully, courage sparking in her chest, and whispered, almost to herself, "I have lived, Derek. I have moved forward." His expression softened imperceptibly, a fraction of warmth breaking through the ice, as though the acknowledgement of her resilience reached him in a way words alone never could. Time seemed to stretch, elongated and still, the cafe around them alive yet irrelevant, while they occupied this suspended moment, a delicate dance of distance, recognition, and the unspoken acknowledgement that life had continued, that circumstances had changed, yet the connection between them had never truly vanished. Emily let the silence settle for a heartbeat, feeling both the vulnerability of exposure and the tentative exhilaration of being seen fully, for who she was now and who she had always been, and Derek, ever watchful, ever precise, seemed to recognize that, even as his fingers twitched slightly, betraying a subtle inner tension, a momentary struggle between restraint and impulse, an unspoken agreement forming in the shared space that this encounter, quiet and intense, was only the beginning of what neither of them had anticipated. The moment stretched taut between them, each second dripping slowly like the last drops of rain from the windowsill, casting tiny reflections across the polished counter. Emily felt the warmth of the morning sun sliding across her shoulders, mingling with the subtle tension that wrapped around her chest, and she realized how much she had missed this, being fully present, fully alive, fully seen. Derek's gaze remained locked on her, measuring, analyzing, carrying the weight of months of absence and unspoken words, yet beneath the usual calculated composure, there was something softer, a flicker of something almost imperceptible but undeniably real. Emily took a cautious step back toward the center of the cafe, feeling the curve of her belly shift slightly under the fabric of her coat, a reminder of the life she carried, a life that had continued in her absence, resilient and unbroken. She placed her coffee cup on the table, the faint clink of porcelain against wood echoing in the suspended silence, grounding her, giving her a small anchor against the whirlwind of emotions threatening to sweep her away. Derek took a single step forward, each movement deliberate, commanding, yet tempered with restraint, and Emily could feel the invisible pull, a gravitational force tethering them together despite everything that had passed. She met his gaze fully, letting herself register the storm of conflicting emotions swirling in his eyes, shock, longing, regret, curiosity, and something deeper that she could not yet name. The city outside carried on oblivious to the tension inside, cars rolling past, distant chatter of pedestrians blending with the soft hum of the espresso machine, yet inside this small space, it was as if the rest of the world had ceased to exist, leaving only the two of them, tethered by past mistakes and present realities. Emily's breath caught slightly as she adjusted the scarf around her neck, feeling a surge of courage, a fragile yet persistent sense of control, and she allowed herself to speak, voice steady despite the tremor she felt in her hands. "I have carried on," she said, soft but unwavering. "I have learned to move forward." Derek's lips pressed into a thin line, eyes narrowing almost imperceptibly, absorbing the words, the declaration, the proof that she had lived, that she had grown, that she had endured. He raised a hand slightly, a subtle gesture, not reaching out, but acknowledging, almost reverently, the person she had become in his absence. Emily felt a pulse of hope, fragile but undeniable, threading through her chest, connecting her to the possibility that the encounter was more than chance, that the threads of their lives had converged once again to rewrite a story left unfinished. The scent of coffee and cinnamon lingered in the air, mixing with the quiet hum of human presence, as Derek finally exhaled, a slow, measured release, and Emily recognized it instantly as the first step toward a new equilibrium between them, an unspoken understanding that the past, though heavy, no longer dictated the boundaries of what could be, that they could exist in this moment fully, reckoning with the past while standing on the threshold of what might come. She let the warmth of the sun and the subtle gravity of his presence settle around her, feeling the fragile threads of connection tighten gently, a promise in the quiet, a beginning without words, as both of them stood in the suspended tension, hearts alert, minds racing, yet grounded in the undeniable reality of being fully seen, fully present, and fully aware of each other once more. The morning sunlight shifted, casting a golden hue across the small cafe as Emily moved to gather her belongings, careful not to spill the coffee that now sat cooling beside her. Her hand brushed against the curve of her belly, a small, constant reminder of the life growing within her, and she felt both strength and vulnerability mingling in equal measure. Derek remained near the window, his eyes following her every move, noting the subtle shift in her posture, the careful balance in her step, and the slight wince as she adjusted the strap of her bag across her shoulder. The cafe hummed softly with the low murmur of conversation and the gentle clinking of silverware, yet for them, the ambient noise seemed to shrink, leaving only the tension and the unspoken understanding hovering between them. Emily walked toward the door, her heels clicking softly against the wooden floor, each step a measured act of courage as she faced the man who had once left her life so abruptly. Derek took a step toward her, deliberate and precise, the space between them charged with anticipation, the kind that made her pulse quicken and her chest tighten, yet in a way that did not frighten, only reminded her of the gravity of this reunion. She glanced at him, meeting the intensity of his gaze, and for a moment, the memories of the past 6 months, the quiet struggles, the moments of hope, the nights of solitude, flashed before her eyes. She felt the weight of what had been lost and the power of what had grown in its place. Derek's lips pressed into a thin line, and he exhaled slowly, the sound almost inaudible, yet it carried a resonance that spoke volumes, a silent acknowledgement of her strength, her resilience, and the undeniable life she now carried. Emily's fingers tightened around the strap of her bag, grounding herself, feeling the rhythm of her own heartbeat and the subtle shift in the air as he moved ever so slightly closer, the shadow of his presence a reminder of the authority and intensity he carried naturally. She inhaled slowly, allowing the warmth of the sunlight and the aroma of coffee to fill her senses, and as she opened the door to step outside, the cool breeze from the street brushed against her face, carrying the faint hum of the city, cars rolling past, distant conversations blending with the soft rustle of leaves. Derek's eyes followed her, unwavering, as if measuring the space she occupied, the life she now lived, the path that had continued without him. Emily took a careful step onto the sidewalk, feeling the firm ground beneath her feet, a grounding in reality, a connection to the present, and she dared to glance back once, catching the subtle tension in his expression, the silent question lingering in the depth of his gaze. She knew that nothing would be simple, that the moments ahead would carry the weight of decisions, of feelings left unresolved, of futures uncertain, yet for the first time in months, she felt the fragile thread of possibility stretch between them, taut and shimmering with potential, a quiet promise of the story that was only beginning to unfold, as both of them stood, aware, alive, and undeniably connected by the events that had passed in the life that now pulsed with quiet certainty within her. Emily walked slowly down the sunlit sidewalk, each step measured, the curve of her belly pressing gently against the fabric of her coat, a living reminder of everything she had endured and everything she was about to bring into the world. Derek followed a few paces behind, maintaining a careful distance, his posture rigid yet attentive, the sharp line of his jaw set, and his ice-blue eyes tracking her with a mixture of calculation and emotion that she could not quite decipher. The city around them bustled with life, taxis honking, pedestrians chattering, the distant hum of a subway train beneath the streets, but in that bubble of shared space, the world seemed to slow, the air heavy with anticipation and unspoken words. Emily adjusted the strap of her bag, the slight shift drawing a flicker of attention from Derek, who observed her movements with precise, deliberate focus, noting the subtle sway of her step, the gentle way her hands cradled her abdomen, and the quiet determination that radiated from her posture. She reached the corner of the street, the sunlight catching on the windows of nearby shops, and for a moment hesitated, glancing over her shoulder to gauge his reaction, her green eyes meeting his with a complex mix of defiance, curiosity, and cautious hope. Derek's expression softened imperceptibly, the imperceptible twitch of his hand betraying a hint of vulnerability beneath the composed exterior, and Emily felt a flutter of recognition, a fleeting sense that despite everything, he had noticed the person she had become. She took a deep breath, drawing in the scent of fresh coffee and warm pastries from the nearby cafe, grounding herself in the present, letting the familiar textures and sounds anchor her in the reality of her own strength and autonomy. Derek took a step closer, careful, measured, the distance between them charged with an unspoken dialogue of tension and acknowledgement, and Emily felt the delicate balance of power shift subtly as she recognized the depth of his attention, the weight of the emotions he had carried since their last encounter, and the new reality she embodied. A soft breeze rustled the leaves overhead, carrying with it the distant chatter of the city and the faint scent of blooming flowers, and Emily allowed herself a small, tentative smile, a quiet affirmation of life and resilience, while Derek's gaze lingered on her, unblinking, analyzing, yet somehow softened by the awareness of her presence, her growth, and the undeniable life she now carried. They paused, neither speaking, each moment stretching into a suspended interval where past regrets, current realities, and future possibilities intertwined, and Emily felt the faint tremor of anticipation ripple through her chest, the awareness that the encounter was only the beginning of a renewed understanding, a recalibration of the unspoken bond that still connected them. She adjusted her coat over her belly one more time, feeling the warmth of the sun and the quiet strength within herself, and Derek, still observing, took a subtle breath, as if weighing the gravity of what lay ahead, acknowledging silently the resilience and courage she had displayed in his absence, the unspoken promise lingering between them that the story was far from over, that the threads of their lives had converged once again, delicate, charged, and brimming with the potential for what could yet unfold. Emily paused at the entrance of the small park, the sunlight filtering through the branches and casting soft patterns across the pavement, the gentle rustle of leaves mixing with the distant sounds of children playing and joggers passing by. She took a slow, deliberate breath, feeling the life growing within her and the steady rhythm of her own heartbeat, a grounding presence amidst the tension that had followed her since Derek's unexpected appearance. He remained a few steps behind, his posture precise, movements controlled, yet there was a faint looseness in his shoulders, a subtle indication that the sight of her had unsettled the careful composure he maintained so rigorously. Emily felt the familiar tug of emotions, a mixture of apprehension and curiosity, as she glanced back, catching the flicker of recognition in his eyes, the way his gaze lingered not on the city around them but on her, on the gentle swell of her belly, on the strength that radiated from her presence. She adjusted the strap of her bag, fingers brushing lightly against the soft fabric of her coat, feeling a small measure of control, a deliberate act of self-assurance, and she allowed herself a brief, private smile, acknowledging both the challenges she had faced and the resilience that had carried her through. Derek shifted slightly, stepping closer, yet maintaining a careful distance, his eyes never leaving her, analyzing, calculating, the air around him taut with unspoken acknowledgement, a silent communication that carried as much weight as any spoken words could convey. Emily noticed the faint softening at the edges of his usually rigid expression, a subtle change that betrayed a complexity of feeling beneath the exterior of authority and self-possession, and she felt a flicker of hope, fragile yet insistent, threading through her chest. The park around them remained alive with ordinary motion, the laughter of children, the rustle of leaves, the hum of distant traffic, but within the bubble of their shared space, time seemed to stretch and slow, every sound muted, every movement amplified, drawing their attention to the unspoken dialogue that passed between them. Emily shifted her weight, planting her feet firmly, and spoke softly, measured, yet with clarity and strength. "I have lived all this time, Derek. I have carried on, and I have learned to stand on my own." Derek's gaze remained fixed on her, unblinking. As if absorbing every nuance of her stance, every subtle inflection in her voice, and slowly, imperceptibly, he nodded, a faint motion, acknowledging the fortitude she had cultivated in his absence. A warm breeze drifted through the park, brushing past Emily and carrying with it the faint scent of blooming flowers and freshly cut grass, a reminder of the ordinary beauty of life continuing, persistent and unyielding, while Derek's eyes flickered down for a brief instant to the curve of her belly, then back to her face, registering, recognizing, weighing the passage of time and the inevitability of the present. Emily felt her chest tighten, the complex weave of emotion, memory, and anticipation threading through her, and she realized in that suspended, delicate moment that this encounter was both a reckoning and a beginning, a convergence of what had been lost and what had been found, a subtle, quiet shift in the trajectory of their lives that neither could ignore. She inhaled deeply, letting the warmth of sunlight and the gentle park air fill her lungs, steadying herself, and Derek remained poised, attentive, an unwavering presence, as they both moved through the delicate dance of recognition, understanding, and the first, tentative steps toward reconciling past and present. The gentle rustle of leaves above cast flickering shadows across Emily's face as she walked a few steps ahead, her hand instinctively resting on the curve of her belly, feeling the subtle movements of the life she carried. Derek followed closely behind, eyes never straying, observing with a measured intensity that sent a pulse of awareness through her chest. The city street was alive around them, but in this suspended moment, the bustle of traffic, the distant chatter of pedestrians, even the hum of the nearby subway tunnel felt muted, reduced to the soft backdrop of a world that existed outside the fragile bubble they shared. Emily's mind flicked through the memories of the past 6 months, the moments of quiet perseverance, the nights of solitude, the small triumphs and struggles that had shaped her strength, and she felt a surge of pride mingled with the persistent flutter of apprehension. As she realized Derek's presence demanded acknowledgement of all she had endured. He moved with deliberate steps, close enough that she could feel the gravity of his presence, yet careful not to overstep, a balance of control and consideration that seemed almost uncharacteristic, yet wholly him. Emily glanced over her shoulder, catching the flicker of emotion in his eyes, a complexity she could not quite name, regret, admiration, longing, curiosity, all layered beneath the carefully cultivated composure that had defined him for so long. She adjusted her coat, the fabric brushing lightly across her hands, and took a slow, grounding breath, letting the warmth of the morning sun fill her lungs, and in that quiet inhalation, she felt a fragile sense of calm, a tentative acknowledgement that the past and present were colliding in a way that could not be ignored. Derek's gaze followed her every movement, noting the subtle sway in her steps, the delicate way she held herself, the quiet resilience in her posture, and Emily felt the silent communication threading between them, a conversation carried entirely in the cadence of their steps and the weight of their glances. She paused at the corner where the street opened onto a small plaza, sunlight spilling across the cobblestones, and turned fully to face him, green eyes steady, heartbeat measured, breath even. Derek stopped a few feet away, the space between them charged with anticipation and unspoken acknowledgement, and for the first time, Emily allowed herself to feel the stirrings of possibility, the realization that this encounter was not merely an accident of timing, but a convergence of lives that had been on separate trajectories, now brought together by circumstance and the quiet insistence of destiny. The faint breeze lifted her hair, carrying the soft scent of fresh coffee and blooming flowers from the nearby market stalls, and in that moment, both of them stood poised on the edge of a new chapter, the air between them thick with awareness, reflection, and the subtle promise that the story unfolding would carry the weight of the past, the awareness of the present, and the fragile hope of what might yet be. Discovered, as Derek exhaled slowly, deliberately, and Emily recognized in that single motion the acknowledgement of everything that had transpired and the unspoken commitment to the next steps they would navigate together. Emily took a deep, steadying breath, feeling the warmth of the sun on her face and the subtle weight of her life within her, and for the first time in months, a sense of clarity washed over her. She turned fully toward Derek, green eyes meeting the steady, ice-blue gaze that had held her captive with unspoken intensity, and she allowed herself to absorb the quiet authority and the faint vulnerability in the way he stood, the slight tension in his shoulders, the subtle pull of emotion that betrayed all the control he usually wielded with precision. Derek's expression softened imperceptibly as he observed her, the world around them continuing its ordinary pace, the distant hum of traffic, the chatter of pedestrians, the rustle of leaves in the warm breeze, but in their shared space, those sounds seemed muted, nearly irrelevant, as if the universe had contracted to focus solely on the two of them. Emily felt her pulse quicken, a mixture of anticipation, relief, and the fragile stirrings of hope threading through her chest, and she allowed herself a small, tentative smile, a gesture that carried the weight of courage, endurance, and unspoken acknowledgement of all that had passed between them. Derek's lips pressed into a thin line, and he exhaled slowly, a measured, deliberate movement that seemed to release a fraction of the tension he had carried, and in that exhale, Emily sensed recognition, not just of her strength, but of the life and choices that had shaped her in his absence. She shifted her weight slightly, feeling the comforting resistance of the pavement beneath her feet, and for a heartbeat, the world held, every movement and breath magnified, every glance charged with layers of past, present, and possibility. Derek stepped forward, closing the distance in a way that was neither rushed nor intrusive, his presence a steadying force, the quiet authority that had once dominated her fears now tempered with careful consideration, and Emily felt the weight of anticipation in her chest, a mix of apprehension and cautious excitement. She adjusted her coat over the gentle curve of her belly, grounding herself, drawing a deep, deliberate breath, and finally spoke, voice soft but firm, carrying both acknowledgement and assertion, "We have come far since then, and I am here, standing, moving forward." Derek's eyes softened, just slightly, the imperceptible flicker of warmth betraying the complex web of emotion beneath the surface, and he allowed a small nod, an unspoken agreement that recognized her resilience, her courage, and the undeniable reality of the life she carried. The sunlight shifted, casting a glow across the plaza and illuminating the subtle movements of their interaction, and Emily felt a quiet surge of affirmation, the sense that this meeting, charged with history, emotion, and fragile hope, was not the conclusion but a beginning. Derek's gaze lingered, unbroken, as if committing to remember every detail, every nuance, every choice she